How many of you remember where we were 2 weeks ago, before Brother Abraham got here? We were dealing with this tool given to us in God's Word. It's not a tool that's so obvious that most people will see it laying there on the surface as they read the Word of God, but it is there for discerning people. Just to show you how crazy things are, go to the church website and go to the pastor's blog. I put up a new blog today refuting Stanley Toussaint. Stanley Toussaint is one of the premier theologians in the world and was for 47 years professor of New Testament at Dallas Theological Seminary. And he has a 9-part study of the book of the Revelation, which I was looking forward to spending some time just looking at and seeing, what he was saying. And last night, and I got about 3 minutes into the video, and Toussaint started off with that he didn't like membership in churches and didn't think there should be membership in churches because, after all, the New Testament doesn't say anything about church membership. And I thought, really, Stanley? Come on. Just because it's not laying there on the ground for you to stumble across, you're not going to see it? So I took a chapter out of the book that I wrote that is now being edited in preparation for publication to deal with the whole issue of church membership. And it's on the church website. And if you go on the left-hand side, about halfway down the page, you'll see Pastor's Blog, and you can read that. And I don't get personal with Stanley. In other words, I don't eviscerate him at all, but I sure felt like it. A guy's been in the ministry for as long as he has, and he makes such a preposterous and absurd statement as that. But just to point out that there are some things in the Bible that are important, they're just not lying on the surface, okay? They are not cardinal doctrines, and it is possible for a Christian to be mistaken about them or for a Christian to be unaware of them. Such a thing would be church membership. Such a thing would be this tool that we have been given called making a biblical appeal. So we have gone through the 7 steps. I've described them a little bit, and now we have begun to look in depth at each person who serves as a primary example and illustration of how to make use of a biblical appeal. And with the exception of Daniel, maybe Joseph, I haven't decided whether we're going to tackle Joseph or not, but the primary examples that we're going to use are women, simply because they very frequently, in their relationships in the family and relationship with their husband, are called upon more frequently to exercise these tools than guys frequently are. To the guy's detriment, I might add. I think it's beneficial to have this kind of wisdom. But we're dealing with Ruth, the book of Ruth, 4 chapters during the times of the judges, in which she, as coached and guided by her mother-in-law Naomi, makes an appeal, sets Boaz up to make an appeal to him. And we're in the middle of that. Now, you might have some mental reservation about making an appeal to someone, and you might think to yourself, well, it sounds to me an awful lot like manipulation. It might. And there might even be, in some situations, certain similarities. However, the primary difference is motive and goal. Manipulation is that influence of another person for your personal benefit. Okay? For example, Stephen Lee would find himself in a job situation where, on a new job, he might have a situation that he might want to engage his immediate supervisor or the person who's training him And if he's doing it just to make himself look good, it would be manipulation. If he's doing it so that he can be a better employee, so that he can do a better job for the company, so that he can be a better subordinate to his boss, that's not manipulation, okay? And so if you make use of a biblical appeal to your sole advantage, you may very well be manipulating someone. But if you are using this tool to influence a leader and to also benefit yourself, there's, excuse me, some of these gurus of making money and the art of the deal and stuff, and they come up with this win-win. They're not the inventors of the win-win scenario. The God is the creator of the win-win scenario, so that it's good for the person that is your boss, and it's also good for you. So when Daniel was appealing to the eunuch that had charge of him, it was good for the eunuch and it was good for Daniel. And we find that throughout the Bible. So here we have Ruth engaging in an appeal to Boaz. It was certainly good for her. That's very, very obvious. But it was also very, very good for him. And if you ask Boaz, at the end of the day, he's now married to a very, very sharp woman. And the result is a child that ends up being, he ends up being, I think, the grandfather or the great-grandfather of King David. So if you ask Boaz at the end of the day, who came out ahead on this deal, Ruth or you, he would say me. If you ask Ruth, who came out ahead on this deal, you or Boaz, she would say, I did. But in the reality, it was a win for him and it was a win for her. By the way, it was a win for Naomi also, because the old the mother-in-law found herself in a secure home situation where she's taken care of for the rest of her life, as planned and prepared by God. So we have already considering Ruth, we have seen that she had a right standing with Boaz, had such a right standing because of her conduct that he observed when he asked, who is this woman? And they told him, and he told his guys, drop an extra bunch on the ground for her to pick up. And then he went up and told her, don't go anywhere else to do any gathering of food. Do it right here. So she had very good standing with him. Then she makes an appeal to him. She had a right basis. It was in fulfillment of the law of Moses. It would provide for her deceased husband, her dead husband, continuation of his family line. It would provide for Boaz, who might very well by this time in his life have been a widower, perhaps with grown children. It provided for him comfort and companionship in his old age. It was the right timing. She goes to him after he is finished for the day, after he has had a meal with the young guys. He's alone, it's dark, it's quiet. She basically presents herself in an appropriate way as guided by Naomi. And then she presents to him what she understands to be the right information. We find out after she talks to Boaz that her information, though accurate, is incomplete. And by the way, this is usually the case, okay? When you're an employee and you're approaching your boss and you're going to make an appeal, don't be at all surprised if your boss knows more about the lay of the land than you do, okay? If you make an appeal to your father or to your mother, don't be surprised if your mom and dad know more about what's going on than you do. If you find yourself pulled over by a police officer and you make an appeal to that officer, even if it's unsuccessful, don't be surprised if the cop really knows what's going on and in many cases knows the law, at least the traffic law, if not constitutional law. He knows traffic law better than you do. That shouldn't be a surprise. So she presented information to him as she understood it, and then he informed her of things she did not know, information she did not have. because it was information that Naomi didn't have. Because remember, Naomi and her husband and their 2 sons had left the country and had been gone for a considerable amount of time. And so some things had transpired and developed, and so certain things came to light that Boaz was aware of that Naomi wasn't. So these are the ingredients that we have seen so far in Ruth's appeal to the kinsman redeemer named Boaz, who would become her husband. But as we step into this developing situation, again, she does not yet know the outcome of her appeal. She has no idea what will happen. And sometimes it is God's will for you to do everything right, make every kind of appropriate information and posture and communicate and all that, and the answer is no. Sometimes. Okay. Now, before we continue on this evening, I'm wondering, do you have any questions about these first 4 parts of an appeal that I've rehearsed to you this evening? Anything? Okay. So let's ask number 5. Did Ruth have the right attitude? Key to making a biblical appeal, key to wielding this instrument, is having the right attitude. You don't walk up to a person that you want something from and you walk up and like, I just want you to know that I'm asking you for a favor and you don't give me my favor. I just want you to know that I'm going to do what I want anyway. That's not a right attitude. Okay? That's not a right attitude. There needs to be appropriate packaging of this opportunity. So think about what we know from the book of Ruth about Ruth. Number 1, we know that she came back to Israel with Naomi expecting nothing. How do we know she expected nothing? What would be the basis for us suggesting that she expected nothing? Come on, help me now. You put in the clutch, you let it out just a little bit, and you shove that stick forward into first. And then you let the clutch out slowly, and the vehicle begins to roll, and your mind is thusly engaged. Okay? Yes, somebody? Yes, Patty.
Didn't the people in that land like her origin, where she came from?
Which was?
Moab.
Yeah. God said He didn't want any Moabites worshiping with the Jews for 10 generations because of what they did to the children of Israel during their wilderness wanderings. And so there was an animus by the Israelites toward the Moabites that was given to them by God. The Jews were prejudiced against the Moabites because God wanted them to be prejudiced against them. So when she's going back into Israel, is she expecting good treatment from these people? Not at all. Is she expecting fairness? If you think fairness, then you've only lived in the UK, Canada, and the United States. You've lived nowhere else in the world. Okay, fairness is not part of the equation in her life. It's just not. Okay, so that's the first thing. She came expecting nothing. Secondly, she showed humility by serving Naomi and working very, very hard to feed her mother-in-law when she had absolutely no obligation to do so. Why did she go back to Israel? Well, because she said, your God will be my God. Where you go, I will go. Your God will be my God. So it wasn't because she had any necessary moral obligation to do anything for her mother-in-law. Actually, when the husband dies, the debt of obligation ends. Okay? That doesn't mean that sentimental value doesn't play some part, but she had no obligation to Naomi. And the fact that she accompanied her and decided to look after her in her old age, that was all grace to Naomi. So that's the second thing that demonstrates that she had a good attitude. Thirdly, when the time to make the appeal to Boaz came, we notice that Ruth did exactly what Naomi told her to do. And it's really good that she did. How many times do you think Ruth had a husband die on her? Once? How many of that once time before had the men been Jewish? So how used to the Jewish culture was she? Not at all. And so it is the terrible tendency of the young when someone who is aged tries to help them and guide them and provide direction for them to kind of, yeah, I got my own way of doing this. Really? Really? You've been there before? You've done this before? You know what you're doing? And the stakes are low enough that you're willing to risk almost guaranteed failure? Thankfully, Ruth was of wiser stock than that, and she more or less did explicitly what Naomi told her to do. So there's little doubt that her attitude to this point was in every way correct. And then fourth, consider that when Boaz made mention of the nearer kinsman, he said there was one who is a closer relative to me who basically has first call on whether or not to marry her. And at this point in Ruth's experience, when Boaz makes mention of a nearer kinsman, what does a nearer kinsman immediately mean in Ruth's thinking? Oh, I might not be marrying this guy. I might be marrying somebody that I've never seen before. Whoa. Now, she had seen Boaz's operation. She knew that he was an aged man. She knew that he was a wealthy man. She knew that kind of makes a guy look nicer looking, I think. The fact that he's got lots of money. At least the only time I've ever been to Las Vegas, I saw an awful lot of very handsome old men with their nieces. Or were they nieces? They said they were, but they probably weren't. But anyway, so money has decided effect on the appearance of an old, decrepit man, I've been told. So immediately comes into her mind the distinct possibility that she might very well face marrying a guy who looks like the troll from under the bridge, rather than this guy that she's become somewhat used to. And there's no indication in God's word that she objected or made a protest of any kind. Would she have had to marry him against her will? No indication of that at all. But I think it would take some reflection on the part of you ladies to think about what kind of desperate situation would a Moabite woman all alone, what would her situation be like in Israel 3,000 years ago, where there is no expectation of kindness, no expectation of fairness, no expectation of anything other than some young men coming along and deciding to take advantage of you. And who's going to stop them? Okay. So her situation is really on the ragged edge of desperate. Okay. So let's look at the sixth thing. It appears that she has the right attitude. Sixth, what about the right words? Okay. Some people think that you can do stuff without practicing, without preparing, without deciding ahead of time what you're going to say and how you're going to say it. And has anybody ever seen this program on Channel 2 titled Bull? Bull? There was a program running for many years. It was the most popular show on television called NCIS with Mark Harmon and several other people. And one of the co-stars of that series was a guy named, Pardon me? Weatherly, yes. And he now stars in his own show. And the show is about a jury consultant and how he, what machinations he has to go through to influence a jury in a jury trial, or sometimes a judge in a judge trial. But one of the things that I think people in the U.S. will probably get a better idea about is the amount of practice that goes in on the part of a trial attorney, a litigator, how they have to practice and practice and practice and practice. There are a couple of attorneys that were famous in the 20th century. Percy Foreman comes to my mind, who was an attorney in the state of Texas. He practiced law for something like 50 years, and he lost, I think, 3 capital cases. And he describes those as wins because he kept his clients out of the chair. He got life in prison for them instead of Old Smoky. And he counted those as a win. There's another attorney who is from Wyoming or Montana. And every single trial he ever participated in, he won. And he would take defendants that everybody was convinced was guilty, and he would get them off. And one of the things that these guys do is they practice and practice and practice and rehearse and rehearse and rehearse, because what they're doing is they're pitching a jury, and are they not trying to persuade them to make new decisions based upon new information? Because the reality is every juror gets seated in a trial has basically already made up his or her mind about the guilt or innocence of the person who's being prosecuted. Okay? And so what the attorney is trying to do is make an appeal. Well, in order to do that, you got to practice. Okay? So if you're going to talk to your boss, you need to rehearse what you're going to say 20 or 30 or 50 times. If you're going to make an appeal to your mom or your dad, you either need to appeal to them so frequently you become a professional at it, or you need to practice at it really good before you do it. And so we see in Proverbs chapter 25, verse 11, I'd like you to turn there, because that is a verse in the Bible that extols a word fitly spoken. A word fitly spoken. Okay? You know, I've been in the ministry, Proverbs chapter 25, verse 11. I've been in the ministry for 40 years. And all the time you will hear some young guy bragging about, well, I just say what I think. You know, that's obvious, because you don't think, and what you said reflects the fact that you don't think. Okay? Because nobody who thinks would say it, and they wouldn't say it that way. Okay? That's not the result of thought. The Bible talks about saying things the right way. And in the culture that we live in, we have really, really stupid people, really, really foolish people, who think there's some kind of virtue in saying something stupidly. There's no virtue in saying something stupidly, okay? God has given to us words, which are symbols, that are interpreted in the mind so that we will be able to communicate with people. And what people use words for instead is to inflame people and antagonize people. That's really not why God gave us the facility to speak. So plan your words carefully, and remember, we see in the book of Ruth that Naomi gave explicit instructions to Ruth. There is absolutely no doubt in my mind that she included in her instructions the precise words to say to meet the requirements of Israelite culture and to accomplish her daughter-in-law's goal. Because you must not just say the right thing. You must say the right thing the right way. Because even if you say the right thing the wrong way, it serves you no better than simply saying the wrong thing. And you might not be, you say, well, you know, that's just the way the cookie crumbles. Well, actually, no, because by opening your mouth and speaking, you may be actually making the situation worse than if you had just left it alone. Can anybody give us illustrations without going into names, maybe sometimes from your distant past, of something where somebody said something and they just said it the wrong way, or else their request would have been granted? Anyone have any examples like that to come to mind? Please. I can't be the only person in the room that deals with experiences like this, okay? Am I the only person that ever had a nasty boss? Am I the only person that had crabby parents? Am I the only person that had an unreasonable sibling? Am I the only person that had grandparents that didn't agree with me all the time? I mean, please. How about this? Am I the only person that was taken to the principal's office every day from grades 4 through 10? Suspended too many times to remember because I didn't know how to I shut my mouth off all the time. So sometimes you learn from doing it the wrong way, okay? Nobody has any experiences to relate to us? No? I'm appealing to you to help me here, and you're not cooperating at all. Okay. All right. So, words fitly spoken. I have no doubt. Yes, Brian?
Well, like when someone can say, "Oh, I'm fine," and you're acting about a different way, being kind of, "Oh, I'm fine."
And that's the opposite of what they actually mean.
"Oh, I'm fine." "Oh,
I'm fine. I'm fine. I'm fine." So what's wrong? Nothing. 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 Brian, knock off talking about your wife in the auditorium. Right? We just won't have any. We don't want any of this domestic stuff here in the auditorium. So I'm teasing. Okay, let's look at the final aspect of this tool God has given to us called an appeal. We ask the question, did Ruth demonstrate the right response to Boaz? On the threshing floor that night and the next morning, did she respond properly when she heard the news, I am not the closest relative here? What might she have done? She could have run from there like her hair was on fire. No. You know, she couldn't have gotten all excited. You know, some people major on loud and look at me demonstrations of emotion. Boy, do they conjure it up, okay? She didn't do that, okay? She demonstrated rightly emotions checked. I'm not saying emotion is wrong. I'm saying you need to be in control of the emotions rather than the emotions being in control of you. Emotions are wonderful things to control. Well, I couldn't help myself. Well, you're wrong. I lost my temper. No, actually, you threw it away. Okay? Emotion is a wonderful thing. And by the way, I'm an emotional guy. Okay? I'm basically, let's see, 3 back at me. Okay? 1 up in the air. 1 to you, 3 back at me. Emotion needs to be controlled. Okay? That is a great challenge. But especially when making an appeal, it's absolutely necessary. Turn to Ruth chapter 3, verse 13. And we'll see on the threshing floor that night and the next morning that despite the fact that she found out something she didn't know, something which could have completely ruined her plans, okay, she followed his instructions. Ruth chapter 3, beginning with verse 18. This is Boaz speaking to her, and he says, tarry this night. In other words, stay put. And it shall be in the morning that if he will perform unto thee the part of a kinsman, and that's the guy who is a closer relative to your dead husband than I am, well, let him do the kinsman's part. But if he will not do the kinsman's the part of a kinsman to thee, then I will do the part of a kinsman to thee, as the Lord liveth. That's the closest thing to a promise she's going to get out of him. Lie down until the morning. Okay? She is probably so revved up that the last thing in the world she's thinking about doing is getting a good night's sleep. Okay? We know that he's not going to get any. I can tell you from being an old guy, he's not getting any sleep that night. Okay? And she lay at his feet until the morning, and she rose up before one could know another, while it was still dark, in other words. And he said, let it not be known that a woman came into the floor. Now, who did he say that to? He might have said that to the young men. Hey, guys, what happens here stays here. Now, nothing bad happened here, but I don't want anything to get back to the people in town. So stifle it. Okay? Verse 15. Also he said, bring the veil that thou hast upon thee, and hold it. And when she held it, he measured 6 measures of barley and laid it on her, and she went into the city. So basically, he loaded her up with food, right? Verse 16, and when she came to her mother-in-law, she said, where art thou, my daughter? And or who art thou, my daughter? And she told her all that the man had done to her. And she said, these 6 measures of barley gave he me, for he said to me, go not empty unto thy mother-in-law. Then said she, sit still, my daughter. Now, what does it tell you, verse 17, that he gives her so much food not long after he told her that he may not be the guy who ends up marrying her? I'm not losing patience with you people tonight. I'm throwing it away. Anybody other than Brian? Come on now. I'm going to start, let's see, A, B, C, D. I'm going to ask someone whose name begins with D. If he doesn't volunteer an answer, I'm going to call on him. Huh?
You love her anyway?
Yeah, I think so. I think he's letting her know that even though, thank you, Dara, by giving her so much food for her to carry home, he's letting her know, I may not be the guy that ends up marrying you. So my feelings toward you are not entirely selfish. They're somewhat selfish. He's a guy, okay? He has an end game here in his mind, okay? Duh. But he's letting her know by giving her a substantial amount of food that his concern is also for her. He wants to be a blessing to her. He has no unkind attitude to her, like, yeah, you can't do anything more. We get lost, kick her to the curb, get her out of here. What can she do for me? She's going to end up marrying somebody else. That's not his actions or attitude, okay? So he seems to be a man who has some genuine interest in her well-being, as demonstrated by his actions. What he is telling her by actions rather than by telling her with words is what? Boy, you guys, I feel so sorry for you women. I feel so sorry for you women. Are these guys really such dullards? Huh? He is showing her that he loves her. What is love? Love is a decision, and it's action. It's to meet the need of the other person. And he is doing what he legitimately can at this point to show his concern for her. Okay? He is seeking to meet her need. All right? Verse 18, Then said she, sit still. This is Naomi talking. Sit still, my daughter, until thou know how the matter will fall, for the man will not rest until he have finished the thing this day. What can we say about this old woman? She knows her men. Thankfully, she doesn't know her men because she's known so many of them. Okay. As far as we can tell, she's had one man in her life but she's been around a long time to know the way men function, okay? I'm not interested in the old hag at the laundromat that's been married 7 times and has had 14 boyfriends. I'm not interested in what they know about men, okay? I'm interested in a woman who's been a one-man woman, okay? And she's been an observer of men her whole life in a male-dominated culture. So she knows Boaz is what we nowadays would call what kind of a male? He's an alpha male. He's the big dog. He's the big dog. He's going to get her taken care of today by hook or by crook. I don't know. I don't know if there's any intimation going on in God's Word that when Boaz approaches this nearer kinsman, there's all kinds of things that he might have said or done or implied or facial expressions where he lets this other guy know that he really doesn't want him to step up and do the part of the kinsman redeemer, because Boaz would really like to do that. I don't know. But all the ingredients of a biblical appeal are found in this example of Ruth appealing to Boaz to do the right thing for him, which was also the right thing for her. So she is perhaps the classic example in the Bible of a woman appealing to a man who has a position of authority that could work to her benefit. Okay? Does anybody have a question on this at all? Lord willing, we will look at another primo example next week, which is David. And Abigail and David. And Ruth is dealing with an old man who is lonely and who obviously wants companionship in his old age. Okay. So she's making an appeal to a certain aspect of a man's needs. Abigail, on the other hand, when she's dealing with David, she's dealing with, here's another example of a woman dealing with a guy who is a very big dog in the yard. Perhaps the single most dangerous man in Israel. Remember, they had already sung about him. Saul has killed his thousands and David his 10,000s. And as soon as Abigail finds out what happened between her husband and these men who served David, oh my goodness, she knows exactly what's going to happen. And she races to get on the scene before David gets so cranked up that he goes hormonal on her. Because once the adrenaline is coursing through the veins, once this warfighter's bloodlust is up, there's no stopping him. Okay, you read about, I don't know if you're interested in reading about it, different kinds of warrior groups down through history. We hear of the Vikings and the Berserkers. And then you ever wonder about why the Romans, for example, allowed the Carthaginians to go through Spain. They allowed Hannibal to go through Spain with his elephants without doing anything to try to stop him, even though they had 2 legions in Spain at the time. Why did the Romans not try to fight him as far away from their country as they possibly could? Because the Romans were more afraid of the Gauls than they were of the Carthaginians. And they were hoping that the Carthaginians, as they made their way through in what is modern-day France, that they and the Gauls would fight. And that the winner would be, despite being the winner, greatly weakened. They didn't anticipate that Hannibal would negotiate his way through the country and get into Italy, get into the Italian peninsula with all of his elephants and all of his fighters, because centuries before, the Gauls had come down all the way to Rome, and they were such great war fighters that they put the Romans to flight. They scared the Romans half to death. They were about 6 to 8 inches taller than the Romans, man for man. And the Romans, they turned tail and ran from them. They were scared of them because the Gauls, who are the forerunners of the Gaelic people, the Celtic tribes of Scotland and Ireland, they were masters of getting their blood up for a fight, so that when it was time to go to war, they were not afraid of anybody. They were irrational and unreasonable, and they would fight until they die or collapsed. And so that's the kind of thing that David probably was quite adept at. And so Abigail knew, she knew something that a lot of women don't know. And what is that? Don't try to reason with him when he's mad. You are more than foolish if you attempt to reason with him when he's mad. You need to reason with him before he's mad or after he's no longer mad. What do you do when he's mad? Basically, stay away. Stay away. Go shopping. Okay. I'm just telling you. Because once a guy goes biological, he's got hormones coursing through his blood, and he's not terribly rational. He might be, certifiably nuts. He's responsible for his actions, but not nearly as capable of controlling them as if you deal with him before he gets angry or after he's calmed down. So I wish the people who are trying to tame the military, I wish they would realize that. They are completely ignoring something about guys that go to war for a living. And the kind of people who do that. So, questions? Anybody have a question? Yes, Jason.
I got my deal when you want to make a deal face-to-face with the person. Keep using effective deal by email.
Ah, it's so much harder. Try to Skype. I mean, if you're dealing with somebody who's in New York and you don't want to pay for a round trip ticket, if it's your wife, pay for the ticket. If it's your husband, pay for the ticket. If it's your boss, pay for the ticket. If it's a high school buddy and you don't care whether you see him again or not, Skype him. But yeah, I just, if 80% of our communication is nonverbal, that means the body language, the gestures of the hands, the looking at the perspiration that breaks out on somebody's forehead, and the fact that they're lying. Okay, they're lying. Okay, there's a certain direction your eyes typically go when you are not trying to remember something, but when you're trying to imagine something. Your eyes go in a certain direction. And it may be that the person that you're talking to can tell when you're lying. And if you're not lying, and you want them to know you're not lying, you want them to be able to see your face. Okay? So person to person is so much better, so much better. So that would be my advice. Okay? Anybody else? Yes, ma'am. That's exactly where we're going to end up with this series. Absolutely. She said, is prayer a form of appealing? Oh, very much it is. Some of the differences are, for example, you can't present to God information that he hasn't previously considered. I mean, he's all-knowing. But yes, prayer is a specific form of appealing. And God he has told us, you have not because you ask not. In other words, there are certain things I will not do unless you ask me. That's the reason we need to ask him. Okay? And the Lord teaches a parable that there's some things that he's not content with you asking him once. He wants you to ask him again, and then 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 again. I say that as an encouragement to April and the prayer group that meets, is it every other Tuesday? Every other Tuesday. Because sometimes you're praying for people that by the time someone comes to know Christ, you may be dead. Or you may have pleaded with God 1,000 times for your son, for your daughter, your brother, your sister, your husband, your wife, your child to come to know Christ. Is that a fair swap? Yes, it is. Oh, yes, it is. Yes, it is a fair swap. Absolutely. And you don't want to stop. You want to keep praying. Keep appealing to God. Anybody else? Very good question. Yes, sir.
How did Ruth's faith play a role in how she appealed in all of her actions?
Yeah, oh, yes, because none of these things were natural. None of these things were normal. None of these were the techniques or the devices or the means that she would have normally exercised as a Moabite woman trying to persuade a Moabite man without God in her life. I think we can imagine if she were a typical Moabite woman dealing with a typical Moabite man and God is not in the picture, how would she have attempted to influence the guy? The way the Moabites tried to influence the children of Israel before, which was sexually. Okay? Yeah. So yeah, she is very much exercising faith. Very, very good. Very much she is. She's trusting God to work in this man's life to grant her appeal. Yes?
Were the Moabites black people?
Not fully, because remember, they're descendants of Lot, the cousin of Abram. Okay. So I don't think they were, because I would say, which side of the family? Well, both sides come from the same family because it was incest, wasn't it? Okay. The Ammonites and the Moabites with Lot and his two daughters. So no, they were not. They were Shemites, not Hamites. So they were not black. Yes? Okay.
When did Ruth have saving faith about? Was it before she left for Israel?
I think it was when, I don't think the Bible records it specifically, but it would be on or about the time she said, your God will be my God. Okay, that's when she publicized the fact, I'm with you on this because of Jehovah. Okay, so her fidelity is to him, not Naomi. Okay, and as a Moabite, she would have heard. She would have known all of the tales about God's deliverance of the people. None of that would be new to her. Okay. Anyone else? Good questions? So you waited till the very end. Okay. No participation, but good questions at the end. So we'll give you a B+ tonight. Okay. Praise God. All right. Pass in your attendance slips if you would, please. Guys will come and pick those up from you. Now, only 2 people